Srilata's here. Srilata, the speakers have come. Srilata, we can start. Srilata ma'am is here.
Shall we begin?
Yes, I'd like to introduce the patron of our club, Srilata ma'am. You can see her screen is open. And with this, Srilata, the speakers for today are Faiz Ullah sir, Yadav sir, and our Padma. So welcome to all of you on behalf of In Tandem, and we'll formally proceed with today's session.
Good evening, everyone. A warm welcome to the Fortnightly Symposium of In Tandem Research Club, organized by the PG and Research Department of English, Queen Maris College, Chennai. And I'm Ibrahima, your host for today. And it's an absolute honor to welcome you all to this enlightening discussion. The theme for the academic year 2024 to 25 is Conflict, Peace, and Reconciliation in Planetary Wellbeing, a theme that resonates deeply with the challenges and aspirations of our time. So, the topic for today's symposium is media and technology in our fast paced digital world. Media, in its many forms, has the power to shape narratives, influence public perception, and either bridge or widen societal divides. To delve into this crucial discourse, we are privileged to have with us three distinguished keynote speakers, each an expert in their respective fields. We will begin the evening with a moment of reflection on the power of knowledge, discourse, and peace. To begin our session, I'm honored to introduce our first keynote speaker, Dr. Padma V Mckertich, ma'am, Associate Professor and Head of the Department of English, Stella College, Chennai. Dr. Mckertich study of Indigenous narratives and their role in peace building. The topic for today's discussion is strategies of peace building in Indigenous narratives. Let's welcome Dr. Padma V Mckertich, ma'am.
Am I audible? Yeah.
Yes.
The short bit that I have. Yeah, is the slide visible?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to look at some strategies of peace building that we find in indigenous narratives. So before going into that, I'd like to just say a couple of sentences about what we mean by indigenous narratives. I think all of us are familiar with this and we all know this, but this is just to reinforce the academic idea that indigenous narratives are narratives of the original inhabitants of a particular space. Now, that in itself is rather problematic because it's quite difficult to figure out who exactly were the original inhabitants of any space. And it also begs the question who we are, who the later inhabitants are. So, for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to be a little generous in my interpretation of the word indigenous. So, I might end up using narratives that are generally seen as mainstream narratives, but not Eurocentric narratives. So, pardon me for that, but I hope that the strategies that we will discuss and look at will allow us to read folk narratives, myths from indigenous peoples in slightly different ways, perhaps. So, given that, yeah. So, given that, let me start by. I know this entire the theme for In Tandem this year is conflict, peace building, and planetary well-being. And I know these are probably terms that we have been coming across through the course of the various talks. But nevertheless, I'm going to spend a little time on this so that we can connect it to what we will be discussing in the next few minutes. So, we beginning with the idea of conflict transformation and conflict resolution. These are two terms that we'll come across a lot in peace building, and there is a lot of debate among peace studies experts and practitioners about whether we should talk about conflict transformation or whether we should talk about conflict resolution. And there's not really be any, pardon the pun, resolution for it. But nevertheless, there is approaches to conflict is something that we can look at. And then very briefly, perhaps we could look at the idea, to related ideas of positive peace and negative peace before going on to, there are various strategies of peace building. But in terms of indigenous rehumanization, dialoguing, and active listening, because all three of them reinforce the idea of community. All three of them reinforce the idea of sacredness or sanctity of the individual person, and not necessarily the individual human person, as well as focus on reintegration of groups and communities back into the larger society. So, if this is our framework, these are themes or ideas that we will find constantly repeating themselves in many narratives which can be traced back to indigenous people. uh, Rather than rationality and individualism, the focus is more on relationality and holism. Relationality, because what we are going to be looking at is a deep understanding that all creation is interrelated. Today, of course, with our focus on eco criticism, I think all of us are familiar with terminology. But this is an idea that is built into a number of indigenous narratives. Along with that, you have, it's not just a question of dealing only with one conflict situation, because one conflict situation never really exists on its own. It has a history to it, and it is always part of a process that went before it and gives rise to future conflict situations, unless it is in some way engaged with positively. So, we're looking at a kind of a holistic approach which understands the root causes of conflict, tries to address power structures and hierarchies which could have given rise to the conflict, and to create a situation where the conflict, it does not turn into a negative direction. Along with that, of course, we have the importance of, I mean, we have the belief in the sanctity of creation, and not just of human creation. And I think this is one idea that is common across a number of indigenous narratives, that creation by itself is sacred and therefore needs to be, uh, not protected, because we don't have the protection somehow takes, it reinforces power structures. But creation, the sanctity of creation needs to be something that we recognize and respect. And finally, the idea of cooperation rather than competition. This is not to say that there is no competition. There is competition in the natural world and, in the world around us, but the competition need not lead to negative conflict. So, we will look at that when we look at the idea of Ubuntu from African cultures. And in all of this, we find that whenever there are indigenous groups that are trying to deal with conflict, one thing that they almost always seem to do is that they tell stories. They tell stories from their mythology. They retell their folk stories. And they often do this in the presence of the community elders. Sometimes they could create narratives on the spot. That's a process that is often called yarning. So they spin yarns. So each one shares their own story. So if I tell a story of a certain kind of conflict that I faced, my friend will tell a story of a similar kind of conflict she faced, and we realize, one, that we share something, we all have experienced the same kind of conflict, and in the ways in which we have engaged with these conflicts, we might give ideas to each other so that the others may use something from us. And many indigenous conflict management groups end sessions with either prayers or with dances and songs, or with food. In fact, in some communities, and food is a very powerful tool for many communities as a sign that you have accepted the model of transformation, that you have accepted the model of having dealt with the conflict. People are the competing groups from the same cup, or generally share food. So food is often a very, very strong and powerful tool for conflict management. In fact, the minute somebody asks you, have you eaten, it's very difficult for you to remain in a conflict situation where, especially if it is armed conflict, food is scarce. When someone offers you food, you do not really, have the heart to, continue to be in conflict with them. I think that's where the idea of being true to one's salt, the idiom also comes from, and I think it's true across languages. So, given this, and just a quick look at the two terms, conflict transformation and conflict resolution, which brings us to the question of what is conflict. At a very basic level, conflict is our understanding that I have an interest, you have an interest, and our interests don't match. So, in order to fulfill my interest, I may have to encroach into your interest, and you may have to encroach into my interest to fulfill yours. But then, if we stop and think about it, there is absolutely no situation in the world where there is no conflict. Conflict is natural, conflict is normal, and life without conflict can actually be very boring. I mean, just imagine living in a world where everybody agrees with everybody else, everybody nods their head to everybody else's ideas. It's not a very interesting world. So conflict is natural, conflict is normal, and this is the basis for a lot of conflict transformation and resolution studies. And therefore, we understand that conflict is embedded in all relationships, whether it is interpersonal relationships, whether it is relationships between humans and non humans, or whether it is our relationship with ourselves. We are often at conflict with ourselves, which means that at a very basic level, conflict is just energy. And like all energy, it can be channeled. The problem is not that there is conflict, the problem is how we deal with conflict. And therefore, we understand that conflict is something that allows for movement. There is always a potential for moving forward. Whether we are going to move forward or backward is our choice. Whether a small conflict blows up into armed conflict and international or national level conflict is still our choice. So, with this understanding, we look at the two terms. Conflict resolution is a slightly older term because conflict resolution assumes that you've done with conflict, that it no longer exists. But we realize that that's not really possible. You can only transform a conflict situation that threatened to be negative into something positive. But if we look at literary studies, we realize that conflict is at the center of all literature. All our fiction, all our drama is centered around conflict. And how has literature dealt with conflict is something else that we could look at. So, related to that is our understanding of two kinds of peace, positive peace and negative peace. So, what do we mean by negative peace? I'm going from the negative to the positive, largely from Inferno to Paradiso. Negative peace is peace where there seems to be no overt signs of conflict. No one seems to be angry with each other. No one seems to be disagreeing with each other. No one seems to be, fighting with each other. And it appears as if everything is peaceful. But I think all of us who have children and who've seen them grow from childhood will know that when a young child is very quiet, there's some problem. There's some mischief brewing or something else is going on over there. This is negative peace because you realize that there is peace, there is absence of conflict, but it need not mean that there is justice, that there is mercy, and there is truth. Because peace cannot exist without justice, mercy, or truth. There are different kinds of justice, which also we'll have to look at. Positive peace, on the other hand, need not mean that people are not disagreeing with each other. it, on the other hand, means that people trust each other enough to voice the disagreements. But at the core, there is justice. The very fact that everyone is able to voice the disagreements is a sign that there is justice. So, I've given the example of two texts, Things Fall Apart, which is an iconic post colonial text, but also draws very heavily upon native Igbo cultures, where you have the depiction of a pre colonial Umofia, where you realize that there is no positive peace because people don't ask questions, but questions are there. One of the characters, actually, after Okonkwo is sent back to his mother's house after he inadvertently kills a villager, actually says, what did the twins do that I had to throw them out into the evil forest? Why did this person have to be pushed into the evil forest because he died of some unspeakable disease? So the questions are there. It's just that the condition around does not allow for those questions to emerge. As a study in contrast, if you take Harun and the Sea of Stories, you have the land of Gup and you have the land of Chup, which of course, given Rushdie, is the Gup Chup, the dichotomy. But you realize in the land of Gup, where people are always talking, at the time when they need to work together, they end up working together because they have actually spoken out all their, ideas to each other. But in the land of Chup, where people whose sign incidentally is the zipped lip, people don't talk. And people, when they don't talk, there is a lot of distrust with each other. So the usual image given for negative peace is a graveyard where there is nothing happening, but it's not a very positive space. Now, given this, we're looking at different kinds of justice. The most common one and the one that we are most used to are either punitive or permissive justice. Punitive justice, which is which believes that in order to provide justice to the people who are harmed, the people who harmed them have to be pushed out of society. Of course, is something that we are very often talk about very often in the course of gender studies, particularly. But peace building processes recognize that justice are not actually justice because somewhere along the line there is no mercy. Because mercy is required not only for the person who committed the crime but also for the people who have been harmed by the crime. So, therefore, a lot of countries work with two other forms of justice. One is restorative justice, and the other is transformative justice. Now, restorative justice as long as justice is centrally governed, largely because our population is very huge. But in smaller islands, there are a number of attempts to reintegrate offenders into society, not by telling them that they are not guilty, but by encouraging them and training them to accept that they made a mistake, to try and understand why they made a mistake, to instill in them that the harm you have done. And that does not mean repairing the harm you have done, does not mean I just read a news article a few hours back that there was some judge who gave a judgment somewhere in India to a rape accused that he has to marry the victim. That is not repairing. That is not repairing your repairing. It is done and to therefore get reintegrated into society. Transformative and restorative justice are huge issues which have a lot of pros and cons, but we'll see how in a few sections it works. And how does humanization and dehumanization, again going from inferno to paradiso, dehumanization is usually the act of narrating repeating or creating a narrative that reinforces the enemy friend dichotomy. So if someone is my enemy, I dehumanize them. I place them in a lower place all negative, negative stereotypes on them, negative behavior patterns on them. And this narrative of dehumanization is something we are seeing day in and day out, now that we are living in a world where there are at least two major wars happening. But this narrative of dehumanization also recognizes that violence is never an individual unique act. It is always part of a cycle. The most common example given that we do a lot in peacebuilding workshops is to ask people this, think about this and answer this question. You see some parents beating their child. So is the parent being violent or not? In a class of 40 or in a 25 people who say this is not violence, 25 out of 30 people will say this is violence. 25 out of 30 people will say this is not violence. And when we ask them why, the most common answer we get is this: my father hit me when I was small. I didn't lose anything by it. So what's wrong if I hit my child? The point is that you are hitting your child because that is the method of discipline that you have been brought up in, right? So you're hitting your child is not an individual act. It becomes a part of a cycle, and therefore there is always the necessity to break the cycle of violence. And the way in which cycle of violence can be broken is to replace a narrative of dehumanization with a narrative of humanization. So two examples that I've brought out over here. One is the Sanskrit play Urubhangam by Bhasa, which is a retelling of the Mahabharata, where you have Duryodhana. Incidentally, Duryodhana is never called Duryodhana there. He's called Suyodhana because that was his real name. Suyodhana is it's after the fight he had with Bhima. Bhima has hit him on his thigh, and Suyodhana is lying. He's about to die, and at that time, the five Pandavas come, and Suyodhana's son also comes there. And Suyodhana talks to his son. It's a short conversation. But as your mother, and he enumerates the good qualities of the five Pandavas. And he enumerates the good qualities of the five Pandava brothers. Remember, throughout his life, he had enumerated the negative qualities. But at the moment of his death, at least in Bhasa Surabhangam, what Suyodhana is trying to do is that he's trying to rehumanize the narratives about the Pandavas. So at least when he dies, his son would not look at the Pandavas as his enemy, but he would look at them as allies. And therefore, the cycle of violence gets broken right there. So it's a very interesting narrative when we look at it from the perspective of rehumanization and peace building. The other one is Majma ul Bahrain by Dara Shikoh. Majma ul Bahrain is not a poem. It is not a novel, short story. It's not an epic. It's a treatise by Dara Shikoh, Aurangzeb's brother, and Dara Shikoh was killed for his religious openness. But Majma ul Bahrain does something that is very essential in peace or interreligious peace building. It compares Hinduism to Sufism, and it just does. It's also therefore a tract in comparative religion. But what it does very specifically is that it focuses on the similarities between the two religions. Now, by focusing on the similarities between the two religions, what the text does is that it rehumanizes the enemy, whoever the enemy is for us. This is something that we often do even in our classes when we're doing interreligious peace building. We ask our students to go around and talk to our friends and neighbors, their friends and neighbors, to try and find out such narratives from their communities and to compile them. It actually works wonders. The other strategy is dialoguing, as in the practice of sitting of two or more than two people sitting together, either with or without a third party intervention, and discussing a problem. What I've put up there are 10 principles of dialogue. Um Dialogue can happen at the family level, it can happen at a small community level, it can happen at national and international levels. But in the last folk tale, I hope to go back to this idea of dialogue, and mostly, very importantly, active listening. Active listening is more than just listening to a story for gist or for intonation as we do in our language classes. Active listening is a way of responding to another person, and it is a way of telling the other person that you are listening to them, that you want to understand them, and you're telling all this through verbal and non-verbal means. So what do? You maintain eye contact with the other person. You don't yawn, you don't look at your phone, you switch off your phone, you lean forward and nod. You let the other person finish before you speak. And when you speak, you don't expect the other person to respond immediately. Verbally, we we repeat what the other person says, and very often also ask the other person questions like, how did that make you feel? Or ask some open-ended questions. Now you'll find a lot of literary texts which deal with these kind of active listening situations, but I'm going to focus on, for want of time, I'm leaving out Mahashweta Devi. I'm going to talk only about St. Francis of Assisi and the Wolf of Gubbio. I don't know if it's a story everyone is familiar with, so pardon me. Just 2 minutes, I'll tell you the story quickly. I teach in a college that is run by the Sisters of Franciscan Missionaries of Mary. And St. Francis of Assisi, who is the patron saint of ecology, is also the patron saint of my college. This is a story of St. Francis. This was after he had become a friar. There is a village in this has become a folk tale in Italy. So this village called Gubbio was terrorized by a wolf. It was near a forest, and it was terrorized by a wolf. Please also listen to the words that I'm using, because folk tales keep changing meaning with every repetition. So I don't know what words I'll end up using when I'm narrating the story. So this wolf initially used to kill only animals, the sheep, but of late it had begun also to kill human beings, particularly the shepherds. And the bodies of the shepherds are found at the edge of the forest, but they are not eaten; they are just killed. So the people in the village get very upset, and obviously, and they decide that they will go as a community and kill the wolf. But there is one elder in the community who says, who felt that this was a very, extreme stance. And he had heard about this wandering person called Francis. And they find him and they ask him if he can intervene. So St. Francis says, he wasn't St. Francis at that time. So Francis says, yeah, he would try talking to the wolf. Francis was a very thin man, didn't look like Goliath, but more like David. And he says, okay, I'll go talk to the wolf. And people are surprised, but they think, okay, nevertheless, let him go. So he goes to the forest and he waits there, and the wolf comes. And he notices that the wolf is limping. He's wounded. So Francis kneels down. He kneels down, doesn't talk. He don't talk standing. He kneels down, looks at the wolf, and he says, "Brother wolf, will you tell me what ails you?" Now he says this in a soft voice. And the wolf suddenly looks at this man and is a little confused, because so far, I guess he had only seen humans who were antagonistic towards him. Suddenly, here's this man who's kneeling down, who's not taking out a weapon, who's looking at him and talking to him. And of course, this is a folk tale, so Francis understands what the wolf says. The wolf, for some time, does not say anything, only growls. And then again, St. Francis asks him what happened. And the wolf says, I don't want to eat. And Francis says, why did you kill the sheep? You don't like sheep meat. You don't like lamb meat. And the wolf says, no, I don't like lamb meat. But see, I'm wounded. I can't, I only limp. I got separated from my pack because the human hunters had wounded me. So I can't go anywhere near, with my pack. And therefore, I need to take what food I can get. So the only food I can get is sheep. So then Francis asked, why did you kill the shepherds? He said, they were trying to protect their sheep. So I needed to live. And therefore, unless I kill the shepherd, could I get the sheep? Now, and the wolf actually looks very sad, and he says, now I'll not get the I'll not get my food, and they'll all kill me, because there's a whole horde of angry humans, and I'm a wounded wolf. I don't stand a chance. So St. Francis says, no, maybe there's a way out. So he goes back to the village and he explains the situation to them. And the villagers decide as a community that they will leave meat for the wolf on the outskirts of the forest, and the wolf never goes back and kills anybody. And this is a very interesting story for a number of reasons. Because you see all the principles of peace building over there. For one, when St. Francis looks at the wolf, he does not stand and talk, he kneels down and talks to the wolf. So he is actually able to maintain eye contact. And he asks questions. He asks what happened. He does not, it's not multiple choice, it's an open ended question. Secondly, he uses words like brother. Now, if you're looking at this as a parable or as an allegory, the wolf could represent anybody who is generally narrated as your enemy. But when you reach out to the person, calling that person brother or with some kinship term, invariably a bridge is built, communications open up. Thirdly, St. Francis does not tell the wolf, stop eating meat, turn vegetarian or vegan. That's not what he tells him. He recognizes the wolf's needs. He also recognizes the needs of the people back in the village. And therefore, he is able to come up with a solution which focuses on the we and not the I, so that everybody, gets what they need, not just what they want. But equally importantly is that old man in the community who actually says, let's not just all go and kill the wolf, let's call this person. This is third party intervention. You have somebody who is not directly interested in the result of the conflict, who comes and holds a conversation with both the parties. Now, this is the basis on which we have, something that we can link to the African idea of Ubuntu. This is a story that you would have found recently in the Hindu in Chennai. A group of children who were told that in front of them there was a tree, there was a prize hanging from the tree, and the children were told whoever runs and gets the prize first is the winner. All of them held hands, ran together, and got the prize. And when they were asked what it was that they made them do that, they said, how can I be happy when my friend is not happy? So we are looking at compassion, we are looking at respect, we are looking at cooperation, and therefore survival and dignity. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for that insightful presentation. Your perspectives on indigenous narratives as a medium for peace building have truly deepened our understanding of how storytelling can be a tool for reconciliation. Thank you so much once again. Next, we have with us Dr. Sudarshan Yadav, sir, Assistant Professor, Mass Communication, Central University of Jharkhand. Dr. Yadav, sir's research explores the intersection of media, democracy, and power structures. His topic for today is role of media in post-truth era, social binding, peace-building agent for democracy, or a propaganda tool for power elite. Let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Sudarshan Yadav, sir.
Thank you, Sayeda, and thank you, Professor Preeti, and thank you, everyone who is here, and also the esteemed speakers we have, Dr. Padma Mckertich and Professor Faiz Ullah. So, thank you for giving me this opportunity to interact with the students. Let me just give me a second so that I can share my PPT. Uh, is my PPT visible? Hello. Is my PPT visible to all?
Yes,
Yes,
it
it
is.
is. It is.
Okay, thank you. So I'll try to finish in 15, 20 minutes, though earlier I was not knowing that what is the time limit. So I went on adding the content, whatever I felt relevant. So just remind me if I cross my time limit, but I'll try to finish within my time. So let us begin. Media. Media in post-truth era, a social binding, peace-building agent in a democracy, or a propaganda tool for power elite. Just few pointers we'll be discussing first. Like media, we mostly refer to as fourth pillar, watchdog, truth revealer, sound opinion formation, creating and serving the enlightened citizens, bridge between three pillars and the common public. So normally we say that this is a bridge between all the three pillars, that is the executive, legislative, and the judiciary, and then connecting with the common public. So these are the different terms we use when we talk about media traditionally. Post-truth. So obviously, post-truth is relating to a situation in which people are more likely to assert an argument based from their emotions and beliefs rather than one based on facts. Or post-truth refers to a situation in contemporary politics where facts have lost their significance in public discourse, which characterized by the prioritization of personal beliefs over the factual accuracy. This phenomena has gained attention during the events such as the Brexit referendum and the election of Donald Trump, where campaigns relied on emotive and often false statements to sway voters.
Um,
I can't hear
Yes,
anything. Is
yes.
something the problem?
Your audio is off.
I think there's a network issue, ma'am. That's why.
Ma'am, I think Sir left the meet.
Okay. Um, shall we go to the next speaker then?
Sure,
What?
ma'am.
What is it? What, no, I'll ask Srilata ma'am. Srilata, what should we
Yeah, I
do?
think but first notify him. Perhaps he's not on.
Yeah, Nivedita, can you just send a message to Sir saying that we are moving on to the next speaker?
Can do.
Okay,
You have
ma'am.
his
Okay.
phone number, right?
Yes, ma'am.
You can invite Dr. Faiz Ullah, I think. Said,
Okay,
you
ma'am.
can introduce the next speaker.
Yes, ma'am.
You can introduce the next
Okay,
speaker.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We have with us Dr. Faizullah Sir, Assistant Professor, School of Media and Cultural Studies, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. Dr. Faizullah Sir's research focuses on media's role in healing fractured societies through narratives of repair and restoration. His topic for today is reparative media, healing low trust societies with stories. Sir, the stage is yours.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the invitation and this opportunity to come and interact with you. So, thank you, Queen Mary's College, and especially the Department of English and the In Tandem platform. I, though, kind of propose to speak on reparative media, I'll only kind of speak on it obliquely. I've been, kind of trying to write this lecture out, and in the process of writing, I kind of veered off in other directions. So please bear with me. The focus will be on largely fiction and realism, or discontents with realism, to be very specific. So I'll not take a lot of time, probably 10, 12, 15 minutes maximum. So I want to start with the cultural critic and academic and theorist Raymond Williams' advice. And he says that, and this is a very fairly, kind of common, commonly used, commonly invoked advice. And he says to be truly radical is to make hope possible rather than despair convincing. And if we look at our contemporary media ecology, we'll see a lot of despair and very little of hope. And by despair, I don't really mean bad news, or I don't really mean, um, you know, uh, things that are unsavory, or things that we don't really want to contend with, but despair in the sense of uh, powerlessness, that we don't have enough imaginative resources to kind of bring about a change, to move towards or move out of, rather, this despairing phase. So in contemporary storytelling and media production, this fundamental challenge remains largely unmet. That there is a lot of convincingly painted despair, but there is also, on the other side, very disproportionately less kind of focus on finding a way out, or kind of giving hope to our fellow citizens, to our communities, to our societies. The difficulty lies not in our ability to document current crisis. We excel at our catastrophe narratives, but in our collective failure to imagine alternative presents and futures that feel both genuinely hopeful and legitimately plausible. And I've been speaking to our students, young people like you, who are often found complaining that whenever they go on YouTube, whenever they go on Instagram, whenever they go on Netflix, or any other kinds of streaming platforms where they usually consume content from, and they always kind of say that they're not. I mean, it's lot of despair. It's a lot of kind of narratives of powerlessness, of hopelessness, of things where there is just no redemption in sight. The dark underbelly of our cities, the dark side of humanity. So there is a lot of exploration of darker aspects of our humanity, of our society as it has come to be, but very little kind of effort being put into ways out of it. Um, so as we kind of aware, I don't need to kind of really talk a lot about it, but we live in unprecedented times. uh, we were never a kind of a society without a fault lines, but those fault lines are being opened and exploited even more, political reasons, ideological reasons, and we are becoming a far more polarized society, far more so polarized country. And a large reason for that is, of course, media and social media, digital media, and ubiquity of media in our everyday life. When all of us, I mean, we can talk about people like us who are walking around with, a kind of a screen in their hands all the time. Um, so where engagement is um, the the model for uh, I mean, outrage becomes, kind of the very thing on which engagement is built, and rage, where directly translates into revenue. The situation becomes much more complex. And on the economic front also, more and more parts of our media ecologies are being dominated by very large corporate interests. So it's almost an oligopoly. If you look at large media houses, they have presence in radio, streaming, television, cinema. There are very few independent small voices that can kind of um, challenge in one way the status quo. And it's not that people have not been trying. So if you look at what have been the challenges to this kind of despair in our media ecologies, people have been, when it comes to news, people have been kind of doing fact checking. There's something called solutions journalism, where people are saying that, okay, news and conflict, I mean, conflict is a very kind of prominent news value, but let's also look at lack of conflict in a lot of places and see what we can learn from it. So rather than kind of looking at problems, but also looking at solutions and trying to think what we can learn from them. So for example, Guardian has this entire new separate section on their website called the Upside, where they frequently look at things, or social experiments or communities where things are working, where people are able to work out their differences, work together, meet common challenges together, and are able to thrive. um, Similarly, I mean, I don't know if you remember, but it became very, very popular. But Taiwan, I mean, it's a very small country compared to India. It's actually just an island, but their response to COVID was staggering, and in no small part, due to the intervention or proactive intervention of their digital minister, who kind of used humor very, very, uh, in a very interesting way. So their entire policy was humor over rumor. And they said instead of herd immunity, they went for nerd immunity. And whenever they spotted any kind of rumor or fake news, their response was 222. So within 20 minutes and under 200 words and with two fun images, they kind they kind of took apart that rumor or false news or propaganda, and kind of tried to clear the air about, and calm down the public and address the anxiousness and panic. uh, Also, I mean, I don't want to go into detail into larger history of trying to deal with, uh, as a community, as a society, collectively with our challenges. But if you remember, there was a time when cinema or public media, which means Doordarshan, etc., were very, very invested in the ideas of national integration and social harmony. Cinema, especially, and you'll remember this whole phase of films of nation building, where they kind of brought various stories from various communities and various contexts living together, so that we can watch and learn from each other. uh, Similarly, I mean, during the times of duress, when the emergency was declared, the period of emergency, that was a very difficult period for the media. But documentary filmmakers kind of worked around those restrictions, those regimes of censorship, and able to tell stories that gave people an insight around what's happening, analysis of what's happening, and also kind of raise their voices about what they felt was wrong. But liberalization phase and onwards, when profit orientation became, the very reason why, a lot of companies kind of forayed into the media sector. all of these kind of lofty aspirations of using media for peace, using media for peace building, for improving mutual understanding were kind of slightly swept aside. And I mean, privatization of leisure in one way, where, it moves from something which is public to something which is private, has kind of weakened those communitarian sinews of media. Community media, of course, idea of community media was invoked, and citizens themselves said that, how come a lot of our media is, or almost all of our media is controlled by the government and private interests, and citizens don't have a stake in it. So that kind of led to the establishment of community radio sector, for example, in the country, where people could again use media to speak to each other, express themselves, and build mutual understanding. But one of the articles that I read, which kind of prompted me to shape my shape this talk around, was by uh, novelist and academic Amitava Kumar, and he published it in Columbia Journalism Review. And he said that, a lot of fake news, a lot of propaganda, a lot of disinformation, misinformation in news is just poor storytelling. And what do we need to defeat poor storytelling? Good storytelling. And he says, like, in the small bits that we could hear Professor Yadav, he was talking about post truth, in which facts don't really matter, right? So, somebody says something and you say, no, this is not true, and here is the evidence of why it's not true. It doesn't really matter. How do you convince them? You kind of tell a better story than them, than the story that they believe in. So Amitabh Kumar reminds us that while both literature and fake news wield storytelling, they stand as moral opposites. Fiction invites complexity, disinformation peddles certainty. One builds empathy, the other cultivates fear. The writer's most profound insight emerges through contrast. While fake news delivers ready made conclusions requiring no interrogation, genuine literature creates radical surprise. Where viral falsehoods strengthen tribal certainties, meaningful fiction disturbs comfortable assumptions. Our path forward requires distinguishing between soil used for gardens and graves. Literature's highest purpose isn't mere entertainment but discomfort, challenging what we believe we know about ourselves and others. Against the shallow simplicity of propaganda, it offers the revolutionary complexity of human existence. And it is where that, I kind of started thinking more about the role of fiction, and within fiction, the role of fantasy, the role of melodrama, the role of everything that is considered for children, for, not for the global south, for the not developed societies, and so on, right? As opposed to realism, which is really, really considered uh, good fiction, good storytelling, and so on. So I'm going to take next few minutes and then end my talk uh, on engaging with this idea of realism, and how realism sometimes also uh, creates boundaries around us, or kind of does not allow us to look for hope, and kind of keeps us locked in this prison of despair. So we mistake realism for reality when in fact it merely photographs the status quo. Fiction, particularly fantasy, doesn't just mirror the world, it imagines its metamorphosis. In an age clutched by polarization and digital tribalism, realistic narratives often trap us in the claustrophobic present, while speculative fiction blasts open windows to what might be. Consider Octavia Butler's Parable series, which doesn't merely document societal collapse but imagines new system of community emerging from the wreckage. Or N.K. Jemison's Broken Earth trilogy, which reframes cataclysmic climate change as the backdrop for radical reimagining of power. These works don't escape reality, they confront it through metaphor, allowing readers to see their own world structure anew, freed from defensive reflexes that realistic portrayals trigger. When Ursula Le Guin created Gethin in The Left Hand of Darkness, a world without fixed gender, She wasn't evading uncomfortable conversations around gender politics. She was creating intellectual space where readers could approach them unencumbered by personal investment in current systems. The power of fiction lies precisely in its deliberate unreality. Under the cover of dragons, spaceships, or magical systems, radical ideas slip past our ideological immune systems. The storytelling distance creates psychological safety that allows previously unthinkable futures to take root. Realism excels as diagnostic work, showing us what is. Hence, why I feel increasingly it's limiting. But fiction, particularly speculative fiction, performs a more revolutionary task of prescription, showing what could be. It serves both as compass and ship, providing not just direction but transportation to territories beyond our present imagination's border. In a world increasingly trapped in reality's cul-de-sac, fiction offers the only reliable exit strategy. So here I kind of go more deeply into the question of realism, and again, because I realize I'm speaking to students of Department of English and students of literature, so I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with the references here. So Mark Fisher, who was rather one of the very sharp thinker around some of the questions that we're dealing with today. Mark Fisher's concept of capitalist realism, the pervasive sense that this world is the only viable economic system, this system is the only viable economic system, and that no alternatives can be realistically envisioned, offers a powerful framework for understanding this narrative impasse. As Fisher observed, capitalism has colonized not only our economic relationship but also our imaginative capacities themselves. The result is a fundamental crisis of imagination where even our fictional worlds frequently replicate existing power structures rather than transcending them. Consider how contemporary Indian cinema addresses caste discrimination. Films like Article 15 skillfully depict the horrors of caste violence, making despair convincingly real. Yet, when attempting to envision solutions, such narratives often default to individual heroism rather than systemic transformation. The brave police officer or journalist who exposes injustice. This narrative template acknowledges problems while implicitly suggesting that existing institutions merely need reform rather than reconstruction. The radical imagination is constrained to working within rather than beyond current frameworks. Similarly, climate narratives oscillate between apocalyptic despair, evidence in disaster documentaries like The Age of Consequences, and technological salvation fantasies where innovation magically solves complex socio-political problems. What remains underdeveloped are stories depicting communities adapting through radically different social arrangements, narratives showing how changed relationships to each other might transform our relationship to the planet. The challenge is further complicated by market forces in media production, like I pointed out earlier, oligopolies and complete dominance by corporate interests. As Fisher noticed, capitalism readily incorporates critique as just another product to be sold. Netflix documentaries exposing corporate wrongdoing become content for the very streaming platforms owned by multinational conglomerates. The system metabolizes its own critique, rendering it ultimately unthreatening. Perhaps the most radical act in contemporary storytelling is not depicting how bad things are, and this is the crux of the talk. We already know that things are bad, but rendering tangible how different they might become through narratives that make the impossible plausible. Radical political thinkers have consistently challenged realism in arts and media, arguing that conventional realistic representations often functions as conservative force rather than a catalyst for social transformation. Their critiques center on how aesthetic realism, despite its claim to objective representation, frequently naturalizes existing power structures while preempting more revolutionary modes of expression. For Brecht, the German playwright, conventional realism created passive spectators rather than engaged citizens. His theory of epic theatre rejected immersive realism in favor of techniques that would produce what he called alienation effect, deliberately breaking audience identification to create a distance. Brecht argued that traditional realism lulled audiences into accepting social conditions as inevitable rather than questioning them. His work demonstrates that how stories are told matters as much as what they depict. Raymond Williams uh, identified how realism itself is historically contingent rather than a neutral technique. Actually, I'll just skip this and I'll come to the part where I also kind of uh, I can perhaps connect it to what Dr. Mckertich was saying earlier in the context of indigenous or global South cultures. Post-colonial theorists have offered particularly trenchant critiques of realism. I mean, even if you think about the story that Ma'am shared, a wolf and a kind of a human being talking, it's not by any kind of stretch of imagination a realistic story. Ngugi wa Thiong'o challenged how Western literary realism imposed alien aesthetic standards that separated art from community function. In Decolonizing the Mind, he argued that indigenous performance traditions often integrated spectator participation, spiritual dimensions, and collective expression, elements deliberately excluded from Western realist conventions, what privilege that privilege detached observation. Similarly, another giant of post-colonial thought, Frantz Fanon in Wretched of the Earth showed how colonized people needed revolutionary forms that could express experiences unintelligible within Western realist traditions. The supposedly universal perspective of realism often excluded colonized subjectivities or rendered them only as objects of Western gaze. Um, Feminist theorists have also highlighted how realism's claim to objectivity often masks masculine perspectives. In Visual Pleasures and Narrative Cinema, the very famous paper and all theory of male gaze, Laura Mulvey demonstrated how conventional realist film techniques structured viewing through male desire, positioning women as objects rather than subjects. For Mulvey, counter cinema, a different kind of cinema, an opposite cinema, required destroying the scopophilic pleasures of conventional realism. I'll skip through the next few parts and just come to the conclusion now. These critiques maintain urgent relevance today. Mark Fisher's concept of capitalist realism shows how conventional representation limits political imagination by making alternative social arrangements seem implausible or naive. Meanwhile, digital media platforms claiming to offer realistic documentation often reproduce existing power relations through algorithmic amplifications of dominant perspectives. The radical critique of realism is not a rejection of truth, but rather an insistence that conventional claims to tell it like it is often conceal how things could be otherwise. Against realism's implicit conservatism, these thinkers propose art that reveals social conditions as historically constructed and therefore changeable. They're not natural, making revolution not just desirable but imaginable. In Mediascape engineered for maximum division, the concept of reparative media emerges not as an idealistic fantasy but urgent necessity. Our information ecosystem currently rewards content that inflames rather than informs, fractures rather than fortifies. Reparative media proposes a radical alternative: journalism and content creation designed explicitly to heal social wounds. Skeptics will dismiss this approach as naive idealism. But what's truly naive is believing that business models built on monetizing rage can sustain democratic societies. Reparative media demands something both ancient and revolutionary: stories that illuminate our shared humanity rather than exploit our difference. The alternative is watching as the digital world, the alternative is watching as the digital world we build continues uh, methodically dismantling the real one. So perhaps what I've not been able to do towards the end is to bring together the idea of reparative media, essentially storytelling and media production, media institutions, um, interested in and addressing, the challenges we find in. So this idea kind of, in one way, may come across as discreet in this talk, but I hope what I was able to do is to, kind of create some sort of interest, some sort of, put some sort of question mark about realism as a default and a superior, and um, a kind of a, storytelling which is fit for the time, whereas this isn't, increasingly it doesn't look like that's the case, and we need to put and exercise our imagination much more radically, rather than representing the world how it is, in its, social relations, institutions, challenges, but how, using the power of our imagination, using the other resources that we have, to imagine what it could be and how it could be changed, and what role can we play in that change. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your profound insights and your perspective on reparative media, and things you've shared with us today is truly thought provoking. Thank you so much, sir.
Uh, Mr. Yadav is back. So, sir, you can, I think you lost your connectivity.
Yes, there was some
And
connectivity issue, so sorry for that.
meanwhile, we had one paper, so you can continue, sir.
Sure. My PPT is visible now?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, okay. So I think I got disconnected from this slide only.
We finished this, sir.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, okay. So I was just speaking that, see, media as a, traditionally we see media as a fourth pillar, or we use different terms like watchdog, truth revealer, sound opinion formation, agent, or creating and serving the enlightened citizens. And it is basically considered as a bridge between the three pillars and the common public. So as I said, three pillars like legislative, executive, and judiciary. So it brings kind of a, it is kind of a watchdog which bridges the communication between all these entities and with the common public and the citizen. Now, the second term is post-truth. So, post-truth relating to a situation in which people are more likely to accept an argument based on their emotions and beliefs rather than one based on facts. Post-truth refers to a situation in contemporary politics where facts have lost their significance in public discourse. It is characterized by the prioritization of personal beliefs over factual accuracy. This phenomena gained attention during events such as the Brexit referendum and election of Donald Trump, where campaigns relied on emotive and often false statements to sway voters. Post-truth politics disregards the importance of truth and instead focuses on appealing to emotions for political gain. So as you can see here, it is more catering to emotions rather than to logic, or rather than to truth. Like in the Aristotle model, we talk about logos, pathos, and other aspects. So here, most profound thing which comes in the post-truth is the emotion. The social binding, the term I have used in my title, it is inherent in the ethos and spirit of our constitution and our nation. Our preamble, it guarantees the social binding spirit, which says that we, the people of India, have solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, and to secure to all its citizens justice, social, economic, and political, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship, equality of status and of opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of an individual and the unity and integrity of the nation. So it talks about here the dignity of the individual and the unity and integrity of the nation, so which becomes the cohesive force for a nation. So social change and the peace building agent. So obviously, when we say that media as a social change and peace building agent, so by following the ethos of the humanity and the journalistic ethics and idea of coexistence, and UDHR, that is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the spirit of the Constitution. When all these ethos are followed, then a proper social change might happen, and a real peace building agent it would become. So revealing the truth harms the peace or brings the peace. Many times in the past few years, there has been a discourse that, oh, don't tell the harsh truths. Let's talk about something of a lighter tone. There was a time when many media they came up with the human interest stories, but now what has happened, we are saying okay, that human interest story was for aspiration, for inspiring the young people to bring some change. But now uh, but now what has happened, that now we are more into the tertiary issues. We are talking about more about the cricket or the Bollywood or the different lifestyle issues, but mostly we are not catering to the real political or the national issues and discussing on them. So that's why the question here comes, that what is considered to be truth in the modern progressive scientific and democratic society for the betterment of this society? This question need to be pondered upon. Now, the time when we have so much of media penetration, and we are living in the era of intensive media penetration, hyperactivity, and there is a less attention span. So there is a fight for grabbing the eyeballs. So the question now, the idea which has come, that whether the content matters or the treatment plays. So what we are seeing is more of the treatment which is being played upon, as Dr. Fajullah was referring to, that it's all about the storytelling. So what story and how you are telling, that matters. So mostly now there we are having a bad storytelling, and we need to look for a good storytelling which not only engages the audience, but also at the same time incite a kind of idea for them to think about the real issues and work for the development of the nation. So also there is a whole war of infotainment, because there is a 24-hour run for content and there is a TRP. So instead of just news and information, now we are talking about infotainment, and it has its own effect also on the content creation. Now, democracy in people's voice and interest. So, when we talk about democracy in people's voice and interest, so politics is there is the very significant thing in the politics is propaganda, and it is not a new idea. It has been there since long, but in the modern times, with the advent of media, we see it's almost 100 years back. Since 100 years back, it is available. And in 1920s, US president elections, it was studied for the first time. And then during Second World War, we know how Germany used it. And now it is in the modern age of digital media. What is happening all across the world in different political regimes, we are already seeing that. So there is a misinformation, disinformation, and fake news era in which we are living. And that at the same time, when we are having AI, so AI is adding to this whole misinformation, disinformation, and fake news issue. So, propaganda for European formation and serving the interest of the power elite. Now, the question comes that why this propaganda? So, the whole propaganda is for the opinion formation, so that it serves the interest of the power elite, and the power elite who are actually those who are ruling the country or controlling the wealth and power of the country. So, now that what I was referring to, power elite, a closely knit alliance of military, government, and corporate officials perceived as the center of wealth and political power. So, thus, the opinion formation is required there. So, this is what C. Wright Mills in 1956 book he has referred to, that it is the economic elite and the political elite and the military elite which come together, and they decide what need to be thought upon and how we should think, and why we should think. So that's why this whole idea of agenda setting theory which comes into that, they set the agenda, that what we need to think and how we need to think and why we need to think that. So Indian scenario. So after independence, India chose to be a democratic state which gave equal rights to all citizens with the power to exercise adult franchise irrespective of caste, creed, religion, and gender. See, this is a modern state gave equal rights to everyone, even to women, from the very first day of our constitution coming into effect. Many even so-called advanced countries, they did not give the equal voting rights to their women, while India from the very first day it gave that. So this modern state truly reflected the spirit of promised vision of bringing the Sangha, that is the union we say, the government, Indian Union, as envisioned by Buddha, the imagined congregation based on equality and defined principles to follow, where everyone had got the equal opportunity to attain Buddhahood, that is, realize their full potential. So the challenge for our founding fathers to shape a country with so many varieties to come and work together towards one vision. So build a new India, we should be proud of its heritage and culture from past, but at the same time, looking towards the challenges of a new world and shaping it accordingly. So this modern state was shaped and crafted by the few men who were trained in the Western ideals propounded after the Renaissance and connected to their roots and tried to build a modern nation like Mahatma Gandhi, Nehru, Baba Sahib Ambedkar, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, Madan Mohan Malviya, Jaipal Singh Munda, M.A. Jinnah, Maulana Abul Kalam. So they all were well-read men, and they crafted the this modern nation. So foundation for a robust democratic structure is laid where contrary viewpoints and people of varied backgrounds participate in building and shaping the history of a country, a legacy and guiding principle to keep India as a cohesive society, respective one and all. Now, the questions. The question arises regarding the guiding principles and ideals of One India, whose foundation was laid in 1949, and this new India with highly expansion of media and its penetration, mostly the electronic and the digital media. So, what is the basic difference between these two India? How this new India respond to the interests of citizens, nations, corporate, and global challenges? Real challenges with communication. When we talk about democracy and its functioning, for media is said to be the fourth pillar of democracy. With the advent of social media, communication process has become more dynamic, leading to making a situation ideal for forming a sound public sphere. So whether this public sphere is serving the ideals of democracy, how in this new India, this new communication technologies are bringing change, and how the citizens come consumers of new India respond to this communication, and what kind of content generation is done in the public sphere platforms. So in this regard, question arises, who owns the media? What intent and ideology is being followed by those organizations? Now, this is a picture you can see that who owns the media. The whole media in India is owned by only 9 people and their family. And out of that, the almost 60 to 80, almost 80% is owned by only 2 men, that is Mukesh Ambani and Adani. So you can see when these few men who are actually controlling the media, they will decide what story we need to see and what story we need to follow and what to think and how to think. Now this is a second picture, though it is not very much clear, but I will explain it to you. It talks about the different leading figures who are associated with different political parties. Like there is Sun TV where we have Kalanidhi Maran. He is from DMK. Then ZTV, it has BJP leaning. Then at the same time, Asia Net, the other news channels, the News Live, these are BJP connected. Then ST Times, this is Congress. And there are other also, Supriya Sule, who is from NCP. So we can see that most of the media organizations are controlled or somehow directly or indirectly connected with different political leaders. And this is a survey which was done about the ideological leanings of the Indian media houses. So you can see that some of the internal media experts, they were surveyed and this leaning they came up with. So you can see it is going from left, then left leaning, then the center, then the right leaning and the right. So you can see the different media organizations, they have their own ideological leaning. So obviously if they have their own ideological leaning, so they will be telling story from that perspective. So as a media student or as a citizen of India or as an enlightened citizen, we need to know that what is their ideology and what they are telling and what is the what stories they are telling and how they are telling their story and what is the perspective behind that. Now this is media penetration in India, though it is a bit old data till 2017. Now it has gone much higher, but you can see that there is an expansion in the penetration of media, especially the television. And same has happened with digital media and other media outlets. Now, this is some of the socio-economic political context post 1990s in the context of India. So I'll be just putting certain points because it is a bit detailed, but I wanted to keep it so that you can have an understanding of India, that how it changed after 1990s. So market opened for foreign FDI, and then the LPG era came, and TV revolution also began at the same time. And it was the same time when Cold War ended, and India was almost on the verge of being declared bankrupt. And this was also the time when Mandal Commission recommended for reservations, and in counter came the Kamandal, where the whole Hindu Kamandal, where the whole Rath Yatra movement began under the leadership of Lal Krishna Advani. And after that, due to that, the culmination of that Rath Yatra, what happened? It led to the Babri Masjid demolition, and further, BJP rule of BJP came in UP and in India. Then political instability also. There was a time post Rajiv Gandhi killing, and then international sanctions also we had during Pokhran second 1998. And then we had a full non-Congress party which had completed the full tenure under the Atal Bihari Vajpayee. So when we talk about this TV revolution, at that time, two types of content that which came to India: the mythological or the moral content versus the Western or the consumerist content. So mythologies like Mahabharata, Ramayana, then Sri Krishna and the Jai Ganga Maya, Lakshmi Maya, lot many kind of programs which came on DD National at that time. And the whole idea was around the different ideal figures, and the most important figure was the figure of Ram, the perfect and the ultimate man who lives with an which lives like an ordinary human and follow the utmost ethical principles. And this idea or this image was being presented through television, and it went to everyone's house. Then cable TV also brought international Western content to India, thus exposing and changing the way India thought about life, culture, and worldview. During this time, Indians got exposed to market-oriented products, and for that, advertisement and marketing practices were used to sell the products. All of a sudden, the humans and the citizens of India turned into customers and consumers, buying merchandise and living a life of abundance on which the whole concept of advertisement and product industry was based. After the initiation of soap opera, the era saw the change in the marketing strategy. One from appealing the cognition, meeting the regular need of the life, went on to entice the feelings, desires, fantasies, and dreams of the consumers. So now one can see that how we started shifting from citizen to more like consumers, where our interest, our desires, our feelings which became more important, and accordingly the content which were being given to us, it turned into a product. So accordingly, those content are targeted to the consumers or the audience. So one can see the news presentation also changed since then. Earlier it was Doordarshan. Then some slots were given to like NDTV, Pranay Roy, Radhika Roy, Aaj Tak by SP Singh, Nalini Singh. She worked on Aankho Dekhi on Doordarshan. Then Asia Net, Sun TV, 24-hour channels, as I discussed earlier. Then FDI came into news channels. Then TRP selling channels came into being. But also at the same time, big MNCs and other stakeholders who had put money post FDI started to become the pressure groups, deciding the agenda to be set through media in favor and against the government, like Ambani and Adani. All the cases of live coverage of Princess rescue from tunnel to live coverage in media trial in the case of Arushi Talwar to Nirbhaya case, Sai Baba speaking video to many programs on cricket, Bollywood, and astrology to garner more eyeballs and get more ears. Like even the sting operations added the thrill and suspense of a drama. We all know the infamous Radia case of lobbying in Indian politics, which was found, and media activism too in the cases like Jessica murder case and the Priyadashnu Mattu case and Nirbhaya case. These are some of the positive cases, as Professor Faiz Ullah was referring, that what positive stories are also there and how it is contributing to our society, that we also need to see. So these are some of the prominent media activism cases in India. Now the public sphere and public opinion formation. With social media change in communication and sharing, so what has happened that Habermas, he has defined public sphere as a realm of our social life in which something approaching public opinion can be found. Access is guaranteed to all citizens. The portion of the public sphere comes into being in every conversation in which private individuals assemble to form a public body. So public sphere more of like people coming together and sharing their ideas and views and developing a kind of a consensus and understanding so that a proper sound society can be developed. So now what has happened that in the online content we are more into memes, trending issues, cyberbullying, trolling, and all kind of things which are happening. Now, social media has its potential, while at the same time its vulnerability and limitations. While facilitating the above mentioned functions, it also put forth various discourses related to society and public life. It has divided the whole rational, critical, political debate into two poles, bhaks or chamchas. If you are pro-government, then you are bhak. If you are anti-government, then you are chamchas. So now the whole thing has come down to only some name calling rather than having a proper rational, critical debate. Apart from this, no other distinction based on thought, ideas, philosophies, or ideologies resorting to name calling. And terms and phrases like Lipta, secular, Congressy, urban Naxal, Chaukidar Chor hai, Khujliwal, 50 crore girlfriend, Yuvraj, Namdar, Kamdar. So when you can see that mostly the propaganda words where we talk about name calling, glittering generality, these things are being used to sway the attention from the real issues. They can. There is one organization, Being Human Channel, run by Ramit Verma, a social networking site. They have done one content analysis, and after that, what they saw, this is of 2019. These are the issues which were raised in the different debates. So, as you can see, that attacking Pakistan, there were 79 debates. Attacking the opposition, including Nehru, there were 66 debates. Praising Modi and BJP RSS, it was 36 debates. Ram Mandir, 14 debates. And Bihar floods, only 3. Chandrayaan Moon 2. Rape case against Swami Chinmayanan 1. PMC bank scam 1. And rest you can see education, healthcare, public infrastructure, farmers' distress, poverty, malnutrition, women's safety, environmental protection. They had no debates. And so you can see the importance of issues which are being raised on different debate TV channels and their debates. So objectivity and rational critical debate is totally missing. And then in the book, India Misinformed, the True Story, editors like Pratik Sinha, Dr. Sumaya Sheikh and Arjun Siddharth, they refer to a different kind of fake news being propagated in India in the past few years. They have categorized and documented the fake news based on different themes. And these are the themes which they have come up with: spreading communal discord, building brand Modi, portraying opposition parties as anti-Hindu, Rahul Gandhi the favorite for targeted propaganda, PM Modi and the BJP targeted, other targeted politicians, false historical claims, maligning Nehru, mainstream media, targeting individuals, fake polls, fake lists, fake accounts, and sciences. So as you can see through different cases, that what kind of content is being propelled through media. So there are different one study which was done by one of my MA students, and it was found that news channels giving priority to religious centric issues, and the respondents say that even the anchors doesn't properly deal with the topic, and they violently, aggressively conduct the program in maximum cases. Anchors are using improper language, tone, sensationalize the issues. Even the experts don't present their opinion properly in the channels. Then there is conceptualizing the democratic change in communication paradigm. So how WhatsApp tools thrive on middle class anxieties. This was published in EPW, and here demonstrated that the promise of Web 2.0 as the progressive transformative democracy appears to have been captured by the post-truth viral content that promote anxiety, insecurity, and xenophobia. So now it has turned into a viral content which we thought that it would be a progressive channel. Now the social groups are not only promoting anxiety in terms of social well-being, women's security, lynchings, but also in terms of identity. So the identity based on caste. Okay, I'll be completing that. So identity is based on caste, religion, and region has all of a certain reason. And same we can see with the Mandal, Kamandal, and all those issues. Now this is one thing that I will be referring to, like online activism to bubble democracy. So online activism, the media considered to be, if the mainstream media are not resorting to proper news presentation, then there would be different online platforms and individuals who can come up with the right kind of story and the truth so that everybody can come together and bring the change, like we have seen in the case of Arab Spring and the India against corruption. So now, but what has happened that now a filter bubble in the intellectual isolation, the whole algorithm that we use, it has turned into a filter. So because of that, we are getting some restricted content only based on our likings, our ideology, our interests. So we might not be able to see other things which are not aligning to our interest. So Alan Bridger, he actually talks about, he gave the example of Guardian, he was earlier the editor, that now what is happening that many news channels, they are floating the content on their social media channels, and the one which gets more interest, more comments, then they do a story on those kind of content. So somewhere this is also becoming, earlier it was a good approach because you were actually listening to the people and their stories, but gradually because of the large number of people who are using for propaganda purposes, it is going into a different direction. Now, the whole idea about the news is the Bollywoodization or the dramatization of the Indian politics in the media. So you can see that now Akshay Kumar, Prasoon Joshi, these kind of people are taking interviews. There is a whole news. Recently, you must have seen the whole newsroom drama around IIT Baba. So what exactly we are seeing on different channels rather than having a rational critical debate. And they are challenging tum ye mantra bologe, then only you are a knowledgeable saint or Baba, otherwise you are not. So you can see where the whole debate is going. But there are some positive stories also, like transparency and internet, like WikiLeaks and whistleblowers, like Julian Assange, like Edward Snowden, who has worked a lot to actually bring the right story and the right documents and information among the public, and bringing the different connections of the all the power elites and how they are exploiting their positions to exploit the public and their resources. As I was referring to India against corruption, where the all Commonwealth Games and different scams were exposed, the Nirbhaya case and other issues where positive story was there. But there was one case where media played with a very sensational approach, which was Arushi murder case. You must have seen the film also. Now we are focusing more on petty issues rather than real stories. We are talking about Padma V, Udta Punjab, and lot many other controversies of films like Chapak, or even the dresses and the color of the actresses and heroes, and these name of their sons, why the name is that. So what exactly we are talking right now in media? So reflection of media, now we need to reflect also on the role of media at the present. Like when demonetization happened, we were asked we should think about the soldiers who were at the front, and we should come also from our houses and stand there and get our money. So the whole thing was compared with the soldiers on the front for just exchanging of your money. And what happened at that time, we all know. I need not go into all those things, you already know. Then Corona, whether it was a failure and success, death and all those things, the health infrastructure of India totally collapsed. And what were the issues and how it should be built, we need to ponder upon. But there was no such discussion on media channels. Then farmer protest, the protest was reflected from the perspective of Khalistan. Then recently Mahakubh stampede, where the deaths were referred to as a moksha. But the last one which I am referring here, it is very important thing which no one in our country actually discussed, the story of Vantara. Vantara is the place where the Ambani, they are developing their own kind of a national park, and it is actually, one should see from a critical point of view, what they are developing a whole bio reserve there, a whole kind of the film that, as we have seen of Jurassic Park, they're developing their own park for future researchers and future work. But it now we the story which we are told by all media channels कि देखो कितने अच्छे लोग हैं, they are giving laddu to and khichdi to elephants and they are caring for them, such a good thing. And interesting, all the big corporates and the conglomerates from the world, they came there for the around their marriage and all, and they were actually discussing the business plan. So, but there was no critical debate on this issue on any media channel. So I will be concluding here that at present what we can see is that there is a stark deviation from the Buddha's dispassionate state, the state, to the promised Ramrajya, but following the tenets of the Samdam Dandhe of Krishna, which relies on the fact that there is no difference between the truth and falsity in the world of Maya. So it is resorted for the sake of establishing righteousness. But whether we are establishing righteousness or we are having their own propaganda to serve our own interests. So interestingly, the Buddha's path and Ram path are the same. So we need to think about the dispassionate state and the idea of truth for the well-being of all the citizens. So new media is one such world of Maya, the virtual power, and the people in power are using it for their benefit. So though some individual concerted efforts are being made for the rights of the citizen and interest of the nation, which Professor Faiz Ullah was referring to in terms of the reparative media and different other through social media and through online platforms and individual efforts where people are coming with best stories to serve the society and the nation. So with that, I will be concluding my talk. Thank you for your patient listening.
Thank you so much, sir, for your enlightening talk. Your insights into the media's role in shaping democratic societies have certainly given us much to reflect on. Thank you once again, sir. Um, we'll move on to a quick question and answer session. If anyone have any questions to ask our keynote speakers regarding today's symposium, please feel free to ask.
Yes, just I think commenting on all the three papers today, or maybe just not, I can't even comment, just indigenous cultures, I think, still give us what we call options for conflict resolution. And because the so-called media journalism, which was once supposed to tell only the truth and the searing truth, except the sensational things, or everything else had to come. That's what journalists were meant for. I think that was their mantra, all that they read. But today, I think exposing the younger generation to the media is a very wrong thing, because the media comes with all kinds, as both uh, I mean, both our speakers have just explicitly stated. It's so very, very, very difficult for a young person, so also a not so literate person, watching the media can simply go astray depending on which channel you watch or which news media. It is, I think, the what should be scrapped is the news. I mean, these days, the news and what is they call the channel discussions. Okay, that is what we feel now, because the once upon a time, as I still remember as a student for administrative courses, I sit and watch all the, I mean, read all the newspapers, read, even then we knew that we have to read between the lines to get at the truth, even in India. And I think the best option would, as all literature people, especially, I'll borrow line from Emily Dickinson: tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Right? That's what she said. And that too, I think stories or, I mean, literature, whether it's fantasy, whether it is fiction, or the world of magic, that is displayed. Even the future, I think almost a whole lot of writers were mentioned by Dr. Faizullah. The word, what is that? All the Ursula Le Guin, all of those people, they took us to different worlds, but was they were talking, whether it is Arthur Clarke or any one of those science fiction, they were telling us stories of our own world. And if we can educate, I think education is the education for the, I mean, today's generation, who are each one is carrying a cell phone, which is a computer, which brings to them the world at their fingertips. I think educating them in the right way is the only way in which we can hereafter solve all our problems, because these are only complicating. So thank you, all the three of you together have given us this kind of a, today have done justice to today's program. I think students who have listened to all of this, if you have any doubts, please do ask and get yourself, I mean, get clarified. Thank you.
For me, it's not a question,
Mm.
but an observation, a comment. And when we talk about, uh, it's something that I'm addressing to all three speakers. So when we talk about stories and the media, we are referring to journalistic stories. And sometimes some stories are powerful, compelling. I like the story of that, when the Syrian refugees, the child on the beach, yes, moving photographs. So this brings us to the question of how we respond. And I'm trying to connect subjectivity, your subjectivity, your worldviews, values. So a bit of sensationalism also comes in there. And so if to a certain audience readership you show meat eating, slaughter of animals, you know, there's it creates a kind of effect in that community, and it becomes a powerful story, and it could be outrageous to some people, to that community. So I just feel that now if you look take the story of the dead child on the beach, it's our human values, it appeals to our human values, your your sense of your sympathy or feelings and the whatever. So I just feel that the human values, worldviews, which are so nebulous to define, play a huge role, and these human values are in a state of flux. It's changing. You know, that's just an observation I want to make and a comment, and I'd be happy if you can respond, or that's fine if you're okay with not responding. Yeah, thank you. And let me congratulate all three of you. And the story, looking at what Padma presented, the story of St. Francis of Assisi and the wolf. And then when you look, so it's stories which move people. It's a journalistic story, it's folklore. So it's the power of the story. That's something that touched me from all your presentations. Thank you.
Thank you.
What concerns me actually is value systems, because we are all into education, and how a story is told, how a story is received is a cause of great concern. Isn't that so, Padma?
Yeah, I think so, Maria, because day in and day out in a literature class, you're discussing stories, and we look at everything as a narrative. And yeah, it becomes sometimes, and I think that's the power of narrative. You can, it allows you to look at itself in so many ways, that you need a very strong ethical grounding to be able to look at it positively. So I think that's where I think we've been trying to bring in some aspects of conflict transformation within our core syllabus as well. And I think that is at some point it's making some headway, but it's a very slow process.
So that way, when you talk about values, and Yadav sir, and both Yadav sir and Faizullah sir were talking about the fourth estate, about the media as conscience keeper, uh, about media as a guardian of democracy. So again, democracy as a value. You'd like to say something about that, sir?
Uh, could you repeat the last line? There was some interruption.
Democracy as a value. Both of you, Dr. Faizullah and Dr. Sudarshan, you touched upon, you kept reiterating that the media is the fourth estate. So the media has this responsibility. So actually, I'm saying something very basic, but I think it's a meaningful thing that I'm engaging with about democracy as a value. How much we emphasize that as a value depends on how we can be influential in our writings, in our teaching.
I feel that there are a lot many ethics we already talk about. Already a lot of laid foundations are there. Ethical we talk about, or maybe the legal aspects. But still, all these things are happening. So when all these things are happening, so everything comes down, boils down at the individual level, and then we need to reflect on that how it is going to contribute to the common public and our nation or humanity. As I always refer to, like though it is a very basic thing, I remember when we were studying in schools, in our NCRT book, the very first thing would come Gandhi's talisman, which actually talked about that whenever you are in a dilemma and you want to take some step, so you need to think that whatever step I am taking, whether it is going to serve uh, the poor of the poorest whom I have seen in my life. So same comes with the media, that whether it is just I am referring to those power elites and serving their interests, or we need to also refer to those poor of the poorest who are also the citizen of our country, and we are actually non-elected or non-government entities. We means the journalist and the media, though the money of the elected representatives and all big corporates and it is involved there, but at the same time they are actually the representative of the non-elected, non people who are not in the government or in the judiciary or in the power structure. So they need to always refer to the interest of the common public. That's how I feel, and it always comes to the individual or a person. Maybe that's why I have put the photograph of Gandhi towards the end. That we need to see until and unless he was not thrown from the train, he did not stand and change the whole discourse and then struggle and then made India independent. As a leader, he took forward that struggle. So it always comes down to that one individual. Like Ravish, he said that I don't. It doesn't matter whether I win or lose. The history will record that there was someone who was actually talking about these things. So the whole thing is that whether you are doing your part or not.
Right. Just to add to that, just on the, that media is considered the fourth kind of pillar of our democracy. In one way, it's in one very definite way and one significant way, it's different from other three pillars, and it's a profit-seeking pillar. None of the other pillars are profit-seeking. And in that way, it kind of dials back to what Dr. Yadav was saying, that it's unrepresentative, unelected. It's not a
Yeah.
democratic institution. And even within, like, not that it doesn't cater to, uh, you know, uh, the last person in the line, the marginalized, and so on. But even within its ranks, it's very, kind of homogeneous. Uh, there have been several surveys, the latest of which has been done by Oxfam and News Laundry. Who tells our stories matters, and it was well known that mainstream media is dominated by certain sections of the society, certain dominant communities. But even alternative media in our country is also kind of dominated by only certain entrenched groups, and that is a kind of a big cause for concern. The other thing is, of course, democracy vis-a-vis participation in media. Um, I mean, one of the exercises that I do in class with students very often is Wikipedia editing. And all of us have, over a period of time, turned into media consumers and have forgotten or do not kind of think of ourselves as participants or contributors, creators of knowledge, contributors towards public discourses. So when I do the first show of hand in the class, how many of you have ever consulted a Wikipedia resource, or how many of you consult Wikipedia resources in a week? Almost all the hands in the class go up. And when I ask them, when did you last, or have you ever even tried to edit or add to or change a Wikipedia place, nobody has done it. So it has also to do with the fact of our, like uh, Ma'am Srilata was also saying about skills, about education. So democratizing media education, putting emphasis on critical media education, I think that's a very important thing, because if we think that it's the job of only certain specialized or special class of people and not us, and we can only participate as Instagram reel makers and content creators and not comment on substantive issues like Dr. Yadav made a distinction between the two, then it is a cause really for worry.
Absolutely. It's about, reading, the readership, and being critical
Yeah,
readership.
I mean, one of the things that is very striking is that we promote reading as a civic skill, that literacy, that everybody should be able to read. But we never really, at a mass level, promote writing as a civic skill. That you should also be able to write, you should also be able to express. So, in that way, what Dr. Yadav again was saying about consumer citizen, uh, whereas a citizen kind of has to read, also has to write, also has to express. What we are only kind of ending up creating are people who can consume media but not so much create media. And by that I don't mean going out and kind of everybody becoming a journalist, but just ability to engage with an argument, give a counter argument, write a kind of a counter piece if you don't agree with someone. I think those skills are in dire need of strengthening.
I must thank you for that point. Actually, we who are teaching should,
Yes,
this
yes.
is a big takeaway for us. So, yes, can we wind up the session? It's been so interesting. Syed, can you present the
Yes,
vote of thanks?
yes, ma'am. As we come to the end of this symposium, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed speakers for their invaluable contributions. And all of your insights have provided us with a deeper understanding of media's role in peace building, reconciliation, and shaping a just society. And a special thanks to our faculty members, the PG and Research Department of English, and everyone who made this event possible. And of course, a big thank you for our audience for listening to their speech patiently. And your engagement and curiosity make these discussions like these all more meaningful. With that, we conclude today's symposium. Let us continue these conversations beyond this space and strive to use media as a force for good. Wishing you all a great evening ahead. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.